And when we dive into that research, people are saying, well, there's a huge debate on social media. When it comes to the studies that have been done in a robust manner, there's really not a lot of debate, and it's fine for us to have that. Everybody's going to feel really strong and have emotions regarding this. And I get it. Raising children is filled with emotion. It's filled with questioning ourselves, questioning everything that we know. When it comes to objective data, there's really just not that much debate out there.
Welcome to Peds Doc Talk TV and this episode of the Peds Doc Talk podcast, where you can catch my amazing conversations with guests on the show here on my YouTube channel, or if you prefer audio only, wherever you access podcasts. I'm Dr. Mona Amin, a board-certified pediatrician, lactation consultant, and mom of two, and I'm here to uplift, support, and guide you so you can raise those incredible kids. Let's get to today's amazing conversation. Today's guest is Dr. Sujay Kansagra. He's a pediatric neurologist and sleep medicine physician at Duke who has dedicated his life to helping kids and their parents, key word, sleep better. He knows sleep and the importance of it, and he's joining me today to chat about sleep training, what the evidence does or doesn't say. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Kansagra.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat.
Well, tell us more about yourself if anyone is not familiar with who you are. And also you have a very popular TikTok, Instagram account at That Sleep Doc. So tell us more about yourself and why you started that account on social media.
Yeah, your intro was spot on. So I'm a child neurologist by trade. I did a year of sleep medicine fellowship after that. And so I specialize in sleep disorders for children. I've been at Duke for, 12 years on faculty now, but did most of my training between UNC and Duke, the two rivals. It is basketball season, so I have to mention that. But yeah, I've done research in sleep and a lot of education-based stuff as well. And most recently have dived into social media because that's where I feel like we can reach the biggest audiences. And so when it comes to writing a bunch of research papers versus being on social media, I feel like more of my impact I can have on social media. So here I am.
I completely agree with that. Same origin story for me. I think it's wonderful and it's amazing how you've grown. I love your content. You're humorous, but you're also very educational. So I get to learn more deep dive into sleep myself as a general pediatrician, but I also really get a good laugh out of a lot of your content, especially your TikTok videos. So really, thank you for bringing that humor, but also that really important education. And I know you don't only do sleep training. I know that's what we're discussing on this episode today. Obviously, you have a breadth of information and knowledge in all areas of pediatric sleep medicine. But I chose to talk about this because I know you've spoken about it on other podcasts, but also on your content as well. And this is sort of like debunking, but sort of kind of normalizing what do we know, what don't we know, and maybe if we don't know, how a parent can approach if they'd like to sleep train. And before we get started, myself and Dr. Kansagra, we do not need everyone to sleep train. I think there's a misconception around pediatricians that they're going to come and tell my baby and tell me that I got to do this. This is for families who are like on that fence or like, I don't know if it's something that is useful. I don't know if I want to do it. And we're here to just give you that information. So if this is not your cup of tea, that's fine. But I hope that if you are against sleep training or you look at it in a negative light, that maybe you'll learn something too. So that is kind of what I wanted to preface it, because I know you also talk about that on a lot of your content as well.
Correct. Absolutely. It's one of those parenting choices. And my goal and part of being on social media is to make sure parents are empowered with the choices and understand the information behind the various choices they have. And there's no one right way to raise a child. I think that's something that all of us emphasize. There are a million different ways to do it. We want to make sure that you have the options and the information behind the options to make the right choice for you, your family, and for your child.
And so I've been a pediatrician for 9 years now. I can't believe that. I know you said you've been practicing for 12, obviously going through fellowship training and all that. 9 years. And it wasn't until I got on social media that I saw how polarized everything was, especially the baby sleep space. In my office, I meet my families, there's trust, we talk about things. And then I had parents coming in saying, well, I read online that this is harmful or this is that. Co-sleeping is superior. No, sleep training is what's important. No, don't do cry it out. Yes, it's okay. And I mean, as a parent trying to do the best parents are trying to do, I think it can be very overwhelming. And I see this especially in that sleep training conversation. We have some sleep experts, and I'm putting quotes in the air, saying, don't do it, some that say do it, some that go on very polarized opinions. And there's also psychologists that come on social media and say, don't do it, it's harmful, crying is harmful, this and that. So how does a parent even know where to begin and who to trust when it comes to all of this polarizing information, especially as it comes to sleep training?
Well, you should trust me and only me, Dr. Mona. No, I'm kidding.
Yes.
I think this is the problem in social media, which is everybody's saying you have to trust me, and I have all the information and the magic beans to grow the beanstalk, and so just listen to me. Well, I say don't listen to me, don't listen to the people. Just let's look at the data. Let's just start from data, which is where we try to find as much objective truth as possible within the limitations of what's within research studies. We know that all research studies have limitations, but we make a wholehearted effort to try to find the answer based on objective data. And that's where I like to always begin. And the good thing about, when it comes to sleep training, or these what we call behavioral insomnia techniques and treatments to help with behavioral insomnia, there's a robust amount of literature actually that's out there. And when we dive into that research, people are saying, well, there's a huge debate on social media. When it comes to the studies that have been done in a robust manner, there's really not a lot of debate. And it's fine for us to have that. Everybody's going to feel really strong and have emotions regarding this. And I get it. Raising children is filled with emotion. It's filled with questions, questioning ourselves, questioning everything that we know. When it comes to objective data, there's really just not that much debate out there. And I like to emphasize that, to say, you know what, it's fine. Let people debate. Let's just go back to the data and let's discuss what the data shows.
Well, I would love to dive in a little bit to some data. Obviously, we could talk for a whole podcast about all the data. And before we get into that, for anyone who's not familiar with what sleep training is, how would you define sleep training to a parent who's unsure of that terminology and what that actually means? And it may be different definition for you or me. I'm just curious what you think about that definition.
Yeah, no, it's great. There's no formal definition for sleep training. It's a term that has been kind of colloquially used to describe any sort of approach that you take to help a child learn how to sleep better through the night. And for me, it's any technique that helps with what I call sleep onset associations. Sleep onset associations is anything that you associate with the process of falling asleep that's there in your external environment that may or may not be there when you wake up during a normal awakening at night. And so the best example I can give for adults is having the TV on. Some adults say, I have to have the TV on to fall asleep. That's a sleep onset association. You're using that to associate, falling asleep, and your brain learns that's what it needs. Infants have the same thing. They're very smart, and very early in life, they learn, this is what's in my environment. This is how my brain goes from wake to sleep, oftentimes with some sort of caregiver involvement. So sleep training just involves trying to reverse that and say, okay, you know what, let's help teach the infant how they can go to sleep without having external things that are helping them, relying on their own abilities to fall asleep. And there are a variety of approaches to that. Everybody's like, oh, cry it out as sleep training. No, if there's one thing you take away from this, there are really 4 core techniques that have data to support them to help teach a child these self-soothing kind of skills. And cry it out is on one end of that spectrum, which most sleep docs actually and pediatricians have over time just kind of drifted away from. Even though there's data to support it and it's safe, we've kind of just drifted away from it, just because nobody likes leaving a child to just cry. And so it's a wide range is, I think, the takeaway for sleep training.
Oh, I love it. That is actually my definition too. And I love that you brought up the wake ups, right? Because there is a lot of misconception that, with a sleep trained child, they will not wake up, but everybody wakes up. We talk about it when we toss and turn, we shift positions. That's us moving through sleep cycles. And the beauty of sleep training, if a family chooses to do it, is that the child won't look for that sleep association. If they're used to being fed to go to sleep, or, needing to be rocked, we slowly or quickly, depending on the method the family chooses, remove that association so that they can move through the sleep cycles and go to sleep and connect it, if you will. I love that explanation.
Absolutely.
Now, when it comes to the evidence, what do we have or don't we have when it comes to sleep training, and whether it's appropriate at certain ages? And one of the biggest things I hear about misconceptions is a child's inability to self-settle early. You alluded to this, that children are capable. And I also know from professional and personal experience that I've seen it, that they are very capable of self-settling. And you don't have to leave them to cry for hours, like you said. That I think there's a misconception. But what do we know about the data and the age and when they're capable of doing this sort of behavior?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll tell you, when it comes to the studies that we have regarding sleep training approaches, when you look at what the average age was, where a lot of these interventions were done, it ends up being around 5 months of age. We know that typically 4 to 6 months is about the earliest that most sleep physicians will recommend pursuing some of these techniques. Prior to 4 months of age, likely the child is still a little bit too young, still needs some help with those self-soothing kind of, helping calm down and needing to kind of co-regulate with a caregiver. But we know that after 4 months, and definitely after 6 months, if a child is otherwise healthy, born on time, growing and thriving well, that they can do pretty well with learning some of these self-soothing techniques. Now, it's also around the age where we start developing more object permanence. So we understand that when a caregiver leaves a room, they haven't dropped off the face of the universe, that they're actually still around, which I think is also an important part when it comes to these techniques and the timing of interventions. And then when we know that as children are getting older, they're also physiologically more robust when it comes to needing nighttime feeds. We could have a whole session about nighttime feeding, but I will tell you that sleep training does not equate to night weaning. I think of them as two separate things. But we know that if your child is that age, they're usually able to make it through the night in many cases without needing a feed. And sometimes that helps make the sleep training process easier. I'm not saying we're using sleep training to get rid of the nighttime feeds. I'm just saying that they are usually able to make it through the night without necessarily needing a feed, which might make the process more straightforward. So those are all kind of reasons and rationale for why we're waiting until at least 4 months at the earliest, but typically 6 months.
Yeah, I've mentioned this on other episodes too, and I'm always happy to be transparent in case someone missed another episode where I talked about this. So I worked at a huge practice in Manhattan. I think you may be familiar with the name of the practice. I don't need to name it here. But at that practice, the owner of the practice and a lot of the families there sleep trained at 2 months. So this was a thing where we sleep trained babies at 2 months. And I remember coming out of residency in my first job and I was like, how is this even possible? We didn't learn about this. And I saw families doing it at 2 months. I would talk to them about it because that's what everyone knew when they joined this big cushy practice, that, oh, we're going to sleep train at 2 months. And I saw it work. And I was like, interesting, but not always. And I started to kind of realize when it's going to work and when it's not. So fast forward, when I had my first son, I sleep trained him at 2.5 months. And it was very shocking to a lot of people, but it worked for him. It would not have worked if his temperament was different, if he was still feeding a lot at night. There's so many variables. So when we talk about sleep, I think, again, like you mentioned, it is so nuanced. Like, well, what's going on with the feeds? Are they full feeds? How old is the child? What is the temperament of the child? My daughter was a clinger in that she needed so much contact to sleep. So I wouldn't have done a full, like any sort of cry method or any sort of training at 2.5 months. By the blessings of the sky above, she didn't need any sleep training because we did a lot of other, things early on. But it's a valid point. I like to be honest and transparent about that because I know my followers know that I did sleep train early, but it was only because although the data wasn't there, I saw it work for families and I saw it was something that happened. But prefacing by saying fully that there was no data and it went by clinical and what we saw. And that can be sometimes hard for families. And I know that's not always a good thing, but I'm very transparent about, okay, this was not data driven. This was clinical experience. And I don't know if you find there is some nuance there. Like, do you find that some families are making choices where there may not be data to always support, or how do you approach it when it comes to sleep training?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do in pediatrics ends up being somewhere in the gray regions, when it comes to what we have regarding evidence. I will tell you that it's you're right. It gets very, very nuanced, and I have heard lots of other practices saying that, oh yeah, we can do this very, very early. Whenever I'm giving information on social media, and you're in the same way, we have to be a little bit careful because we're speaking to broad audiences when there's lots of potential. You talked about temperament, et cetera. And so we're giving kind of generalities, which we think are going to apply to the vast majority of individuals out there. And we know that, that age range that we're discussing for sleep training at 4 to 6 months will apply to the vast majority of individuals out there. we also know that based on data that there are children that start to self-settle and soothe without needing any type of sleep training intervention whatsoever. And this is why you jump on social media and your friend down the road, her baby is sleeping 12 hours at, 8 weeks of age, and you're pulling your hair out saying, what am I doing
Yeah.
wrong? Or your own child, right? You have one child that's an amazing sleeper, your first one, you're like, we're doing everything perfect, and that's why we got this lined up. And your second child drop kicks you in the face, and you're like, well, we did everything the exact same way, and we have a completely
Yeah.
different sleeper. Well, it's because every child is different. Even two children in your own home are going to be completely different. They're going to have different temperaments, different, sleep, neurotransmitter milieu, etc. And so you can't compare one to the other. And we know that when it comes to general population, at around those ages, 4 to 6 months, the majority of children are safe to be able to try to learn some of these self-soothing techniques.
I love it. And I don't think we don't need to go into detail of that 4 main sort of categories. I know you mentioned there's like 4 different types of sleep training, but maybe just name them off. You don't need to explain how to do each one on the show, but name them off. And I know you also have a book, correct? That maybe goes through all that as well?
Yeah, I have it's called My Child Won't Sleep. I wrote it actually during after my first child was born, in the throes of like sleep deprivation. I'm like, why don't we just have a book that has like step by step every single method, instead of cut out all the fluff and just get to the methods.
Yes,
so
perfect.
it's like in 20 minutes you can read through all the techniques. But extinction is the cry it out. Graduate extinction, aka the Ferber method. We have camping out, which has different names too, the chair method or the sleep lady shuffle, etc. And then scheduled awakenings, which is one that we don't typically use all that often because it involves waking the child up at certain times and spacing out those awakenings. Those are the 4 main techniques regarding data to support them for sleep training.
Wonderful. And if you want more information, I know there's that book there. And again, I would love for our listeners to get balanced information about sleep. And what I mean by that is, I can tell you that just from your credentials and also just the way you approach sleep, it's not just the fact that you have these degrees, it's the fact that you understand not only by being a father yourself, but also understanding, like you've already said, the difference in temperaments, the difference in sibling 1 versus sibling 2. I think when a person who is giving information understands that every child is different, and also maybe a family situation might change baby to baby, right? Maybe the first baby, they had no problem doing the, whether it's co-sleeping or whatever it is. And then second baby, they're like, I need something different. So everything always evolves. We always need to pivot and get the good resources from people who understand the evidence, but also the, real life clinical experience like you do. So I will be linking that book and all of your resources at the end of this conversation. Going into more of like things that I've heard on social, and I'm sure you have heard as well, and are constantly debunking and getting attacked about, is this common narrative that sleep training isn't possible for infants because a baby's prefrontal cortex isn't developed. This is what I commonly hear. So is there evidence to support that there's harm, and maybe diving into that narrative, and maybe if you know even why and how it started?
Yeah, it's interesting. Social media is like the ideal breeding ground for using scientific lingo in a way that really just makes no sense. It's just because these types of things, get a lot of buzz, and people spread it quickly, and the prefrontal cortex isn't developed, so the child can't learn something, and you know this, and you've commented on this, the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed till 20 something, right? I mean, are we just not going to teach children anything until they're 20 something? And so no, infants, everyone can learn a lot at various stages of their life, regardless of development in various parts of the brain. The prefrontal cortex, is great for executive function and, emotional regulation, etc. But when it comes to the process of turning your brain off and falling asleep, yes, you can learn that at the ages that we discussed already. So there's no evidence to say that children are unable to self-soothe. And we know this because many children do it without any sleep training whatsoever, right? I mean, when we look at the data at 10% of children, even at 1 month of age, are sleeping, quote unquote, through the night, getting at like up to an 8-hour stretch. And we know that they're waking up multiple times and self-soothing. You've never had to sleep train them. They just do it naturally. So of course, millions of children are doing it as we speak right now, self-soothing themselves to sleep, So yes, it happens, and you don't necessarily need a fully developed prefrontal cortex for that. You also don't need a fully developed prefrontal cortex for high school and for calculus. So just,
exactly. No, I that was a recent one that I saw, and I'm like, wait, what is happening? I'm like, again, I love how you phrase that, because taking very common and buzzworthy science lingo, and when you don't understand the science and what that actually means, and just using it to create fear, it's not a good tactic. And I'm very
Yeah.
defensive of this on social, and I know you may be, but I'm very defensive because, in my opinion, again, we talked about it all being parental choice. We talked about whatever a parent wants to, however they want to approach. But what happens is then I get mothers, fathers, mainly mothers, that come into my office who are like, well, I read that this is harmful, and I can't get it out of my head, but I'm so
Yeah.
sleep deprived, and I want to approach it, whether it's one of those four methods that you mentioned. And I'm afraid. I'm afraid that even if I let my baby cry for 3 to 5 minutes, sometimes,
Hmm.
again, you don't have to let your baby cry for 45 minutes. It's long. But if you're using pausing, if you're using graduated extinction, I know from personal experience how amazingly impactful it has been for both of our children who have very different
Yes.
temperaments, that I'm like, hey, I know it's hard. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy hearing a baby cry if you choose a graduated extinction method, for example, but just
Yeah.
wait. And if you need to go in, you're going to go in. It's not like all or nothing. It's not like, well, I
That's
decided
right.
to
That's right.
let them cry, so now I can't even check in. No, you're going to watch them on a monitor. You're going to see if they're escalating. You can go in. It's not a hard or fast
Yeah.
like rule here. And I think people forget
That's
that sort
right.
of nuance too.
That's right. There's no replacing a parent. There's no replacing parenting. You're going to go in and
Yeah.
make the parenting decisions that you think are best for your baby. And there are so many modifications to all these techniques that you can use to do something that you feel comfortable with. And if there's two caregivers in the house, you have to have agreement between caregivers. There has to be some give and take and, a compromise. But yeah, people are saying, oh, I don't want to leave my baby alone in the room. And I say, okay, don't, like stay in the room and you can be right there and do it graduate extinction with parental presence.
Yeah.
There's so many like caveats to all these techniques. I can't wait 5 minutes. That's what the Ferber book tells me. Don't wait 5 minutes. Start off with 1 minute. Check
Yes.
in every 2 minutes if you want. It's all kind of arbitrary. You can mix and match to what works for you and your family. But these techniques, again, you can modify them. You can change them a bit. The whole goal here is that when your child's eyes go from open to closed and they fall asleep, that they have done so without you actively intervening. That's all. Without any active kind of rocking or patting. They've done that without that active intervention, and that's the whole goal. And I say that as
Yeah.
if it's so easy, and I get it. We did this for my first child. It was hard. It was
Hmm.
emotional. As a sleep doctor, after 2 days of this, if I wasn't a sleep doc, I'd probably give in to all the things that I might hear in social media about how terrible it is and say,
Right.
forget it, I'm not going to do it. And then what came out on the other end was this amazing, just happy, just settled child that would go for 11-hour stretches, wake up so happy, so
Yeah.
refreshed, and everybody was sleeping. And it's just like night and day difference. Our world was just completely, it was just, it's like, I want to offer this to people, like I want to make sure people understand that there's light at the end, there's hope. And at the same time, also want people to understand that if you feel like you can't sleep train based on everything you've heard, or it's just a personal preference that you don't want to, that's okay too. I'm here to
Yeah.
tell you, and you're here to tell people, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. If we had data that said at 5 years of age, your child would be unhealthier because they're not getting the sleep that they need because you didn't sleep train, then we'd be having a different conversation. But
Yes.
based on the long-term data we have, it's all a wash. By the time you're 5 and 6, when we look at all the metrics when it comes to sleep, everybody's about the same, whether you sleep trained or not. And so long-term, yeah, it's all kind of a wash, and you're going to be fine whether you sleep train or not. But clear short-term and medium-term benefits for your child's sleep and for lots of other metrics, maternal mood scores and maternal depression scores, we know for sure improve. When it
Yes.
comes to parental, bond with their child, this is something that we talk about the opposite. People say, "Oh, if you sleep train, your child's going to hate you." Well, the data actually shows the opposite. Bond can actually improve, which is only natural when everybody's sleeping and well rested. That the bond is going to be better. Marital satisfaction, so many things improve short and medium term that I have to offer this to you. I have to tell you this is an option because we do have data to support benefit.
Oh yeah. I mean, and again, you're taking a holistic approach to sleep, right? I think we tend to focus on the baby needs to sleep versus, okay, it's good for the parent, but it is healthy for everyone. And as a sleep doc and someone who as a pediatrician who loves to talk about sleep, I just think it's so important that we know that it's going to benefit many people in the long run. I have never had a family come into my office, tell me, hey, I regret sleep training or regret teaching my child self-settling skills. It's usually the opposite. Hey, why didn't I do this sooner? You were right. It works. And
Yes.
now we're all sleeping. And that point that you made, that baby woke up happy. One of the things that makes me just so like, oh, guys, when people talk about the lack of bond and the fact that they're going to feel sleep deprived or that they're going to just shut down. We'll talk about that next, that if we choose a cry method, for example, whether it's Ferber or full extinction, they're just going to stop crying because their brain shut down. And I'm like, okay,
Mm.
if that was the case, they would not be able to have any affect. They would not have any bond with the caregiver during the day. We don't see that. Like, we don't see that at all. Like, there is
100%.
love, there's affection. So let's talk about that more. I mean, that idea of
Sure.
if we choose a cry method, that baby just gave up. And that's
Yeah.
harm. People throw out the word trauma. And I hate when people throw out the word trauma for things that are not real
Yeah.
trauma as someone who sees trauma. So let's talk about that
Yes.
more.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you that, people apply this theory of learned helplessness oftentimes in sleep training, and that's not what sleep training is. And it all goes back to most likely, Eastern European orphanages, like Romanian orphanages. They notice that it's eerily quiet when they walk in, into these orphanages, and the theory here is that children have learned to stop crying because no one's coming to help them over,
Mm-hmm.
months and years of neglect and likely abuse, right?
Right.
And that's, again, this is just a theory. There's probably many reasons why a child in that situation wouldn't cry. Perhaps they don't have enough nourishment to actually, be able to generate crying. Perhaps they've learned if they cry, they actually, you know, are subject to terrible things, right? When they cry. So there could be many reasons why a child in that situation is not crying. But let's say maybe this is learned helplessness. They've learned that even if they cry, no one is coming to help them, so they stop crying. Your child in a loving home with a loving caregiver that is fed, that's clothed, that's comfortable, that has a clean diaper, that has temperature control in your home,
Mm-hmm.
um, is not undergoing learned helplessness and is not undergoing trauma. And to equate the two, I think, is a slap in the face to children that have actually experienced true trauma. And
Correct.
much like what you're saying, it's hurtful. It's that people use and try to correlate the two. It truly shows that the extent that people go to try to dissuade folks from sleep training. This is not what sleep training is. And even the theory behind learned helplessness, we can dive into the nuance of the experiments that were done. But the whole premise of learned helplessness is that you are then taken into a new situation, not the one that you were in where you learned helplessness, but then you apply that same lack of response in your new situation where you feel like you can't escape whatever harm is coming to you. In the
Yeah.
experiments, that was electric shock to dogs, which is where the experiment would first take place. And they didn't leave this area. They're like, oh, I'm going to be shocked, and they just sat there. Infants that undergo sleep training do not then completely shut down, as you mentioned. When they need help, they still ask for it. If they're teething and they're
Yeah.
in pain, they will still fuss and they'll cry. If there's a lightning storm and they're scared, they're going to fuss, they're going to cry. And
Right.
during the day, when their needs are not being met for whatever reason, emotionally or for they're hungry, etc., they are still going to fuss and cry and get your attention. If it was learned helplessness, they would just sit there and do absolutely nothing for
Yes.
the entire day, right? And that's just not what this is. And it's taking like a one-off kind of what sounds scientific and attention grabbing and applying it to a situation where it just does not apply. And just like you, the fear mongering just really hurts because as a parent, I'm fortunate enough to have that medical background. I can look at some of this information, say that is complete bunk, and feel really confident in that. I can even
Mm-hmm.
look at a research study that's published in a peer-reviewed journal, and this is what oftentimes people don't understand, that there is a range when it comes to peer-reviewed literature out there where some research, just because it's published in a journal, does not make it fact. And that's
Yeah.
hard to understand if you're not like we had Journal Club this morning where we are just tearing into articles and saying these are the caveats where this particular set of data may not apply more generally, and these are the 7 other research articles that we know of that were done in a more robust way. So we're able to do all that. And so I'm very fortunate in that, and I try to kind of get that through my social media channels as well. That well, this is the data that we have and we don't have. But I totally understand why people would be scared out of their minds based on what they hear online. and it's just doesn't apply in this situation. We gotta try to stop the fear mongering. I think parents just throw each other under the bus on social media. Like
Yeah.
all these parents are like, oh, well, we want to take care of our infants, and they're just tearing each other apart. And I'm like, why are we doing this to each other? Like, why are parenting is not a blood sport?
I
Like we
know
can
it's become.
we can understand that we're doing things differently and still actually coexist. My God,
Yes. Well, I
it's
mean,
yeah.
that's
So
that's exactly where I get my defenses up. I've become very like, okay, I'm not going to get inflammatory. I'm not going to get like this on social. But when it's people posing themselves as experts, and maybe they're not, but posing themselves as, hey, this is what I know. Here, let me link this article. When we know that in captions you can't even link articles because you can't click on it. So you're just doing this to psychologically show people that you know what you're talking about, but you don't even know
yeah,
the nitty gritty, like you just mentioned beautifully, that not all research is the same. And I'm going to have a guest come on in the future to talk about research studies in general and what people should know when they are consuming content like that online from content creators that don't have an educational background in this type of stuff. And it's so important because it leads to, like you said, that division that, well, I'm superior, you're superior. And you do a great job of this as well as myself, I feel, in that we are not touting things as superior. We're saying, here's a resource. Here is what you can
yeah,
do. But it's not like if you don't do it, your kid's not going to ever sleep alone. You had alluded
yeah,
to before that, by age of 5, there's obviously the kid is going to be most likely they're going to be sleeping fine. I do see cases, 8, 9-year-olds who are still sleeping with a parent. They're in school. It's becoming an issue. And so for
yeah,
me, it is important for me to talk to the family by the time the kid is going into school age, by the time the kid's getting older, and say, hey, mom, dad, are you ready to have this conversation? Because I think it's for the best interest of your child too, that they learn these
yes.
very foundational skills.
Yep. And I always say, it all comes down to, is it a problem for the family? Is it a problem for the
Right.
child? Is it a problem for the parent? And the parent and the family unit gets to decide what a problem is. Social media
Right.
doesn't get to decide that for you. Is it a problem? And if so, if you're willing to explore solutions, there are numerous solutions. But it all comes down to, yes, is there a problem? And what you define as a problem. We like to, of course, set up age appropriate expectations for what normal is and what it isn't. And so, we have to sometimes make sure to understand that, yeah, your child is going to wake up multiple times. The first 6 weeks are going to be a complete, crap show,
Yeah.
when the first child's first born, and things will improve. But yeah, is it a problem is question number one. And if it is, let's look at the range of solutions. The problem I find, Dr. Mona, is when we try to take a leveled approach and try to say, well, these are all the options, and try not to be inflammatory, the very nature of social media is that it caters towards inflammatory.
Yes.
It's people that are
Clickbait.
out here.
Yeah.
That's
Hmm.
right. People that are out here saying, oh, monoxide dihydrogen is infesting our homes right now. It's everywhere. Children are consuming it in these plastic bottles, and it's monoxide dihydrogen is and it's leaking out of our faucets, and you're like, well, that's water.
Yeah. Yeah.
Monoxide
Yeah.
dihydrogen is water. And but when people say things with such conviction, such inflammation, everybody pours in the comments, either a support or against, and they just get
Yeah.
escalated, elevated on these platforms. When we're here saying the boring things like, oh, well, here are your options, and this is what the data shows, and we don't feel strongly about, this or other, it's people just yawn and kind of move on. They're like, okay, thanks for the information, but it doesn't spread to
Right.
millions. And so that's why I'm glad there are more creators like you that have the audience to then show people this is the range, and we don't have to be inflammatory about it. Let's just give you some options. And I hope there are more creators. And I'm trying. I actually just made a recent post about let's get more docs on this platform. Trying to fight misinformation. This is where we can really be useful to share things that are level, that are balanced, and let people empower people with true options that are safe and effective.
Oh, don't get me wrong. There's many times where I'm like, I need to create more clickbaity stuff because I mean, in all aspects of the parenting space on social, there's a lot of obviously clickbait that goes viral because of that, exactly what you said, either in agreement or disagreement. But of course, that elevates that platform. The last thing, which I'm sure we can talk about even more than just this, is the insight into the thought that sleep training leads to the increase in cortisol levels that are
Hmm.
damaging. And we don't need to go into really heavy detail. I do have an episode that I did solely on cortisol and sleep studies, but just kind of from
Wonderful.
your basic understanding and how you would explain it to a family who's concerned about that sort of misinformation surrounding cortisol spikes and that's damaging to the child's brain.
Yeah, I would sum up in one sentence, and I can give you a little bit more details. The whole cortisol and sleep training thing is a whopping nothing burger. That would be my one-liner. It's a whopping nothing burger. It's people love, again, diving into taking a little bit of science and just going crazy. The initial study that got all this started, if you read the study, and I encourage anybody that has background in research just to read over that study. It was a small group, 25 infants. It was a complete extinction approach. It was done in a hospital-based scenario. The child was separated from the mother at nighttime and had like a nurse that's sitting in the room with them. There are so many reasons for a child's cortisol to be elevated in that scenario.
Yeah.
They're taking salivary samples of cortisol. And the whole premise was, look, mom's and baby's cortisol started here. Mom's cortisol, after 3 days dropped to here, but baby's cortisol is still here, So day 1 of sleep training, cortisol is here. Day 3, it's still right around here. Why isn't it dropping? Well, for all of those reasons, and there are even lots of caveats to even why we're using cortisol as a measure of stress. People are surprised to learn that it waxes and wanes throughout the day in a circadian fashion that has nothing to do with stress. But let's pretend it was a perfect marker of stress. Why didn't the babies drop? Well, if you look at the study, the question number 1 was, what was the baby's baseline before you even started sleep training? And they didn't even share a baseline.
Check that. Yes.
And so when it comes to just basic rigor of scientific research, you got to have a baseline before you are telling people where it's going to go. And so it didn't change. It didn't go up because everyone's like, oh, cortisol rises. No. Even the initial paper that got everybody worried about this, cortisol never went up. It's just that mom's dropped. And so if mom had remained equally stressed, there would be no paper. So maybe the answer was we just need to stress mom out more, because then there's no paper, right? But that doesn't make much sense. And so we said, oh, look, it's different, and that's no good because baby's cortisol stays high, and now mom's not going to respond to it. That's where we're stretching things a bit. Future studies have actually shown cortisol levels decrease after sleep training.
Yeah.
And long term, there's no difference in cortisol levels. I could use that data and come out here and be like, oh my gosh, you've got to sleep train. Look, cortisol levels actually drop. I will never do that. I will never do that, even though I actually have more rigorous science to say the other narrative, to say, yes, cortisol is an issue and you should consider sleep training, because I don't think it really has any clinically meaningful relevance at the end of the day. And so, so that's the cortisol story.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. I talked to someone who researches cortisol and was involved in a lot of that study. It was an old episode I did when I first started my podcast. It's called Cry Babies, the research behind cortisol and sleep training. So I'll link that in the show notes too for anyone who's interested. But exactly what Dr. Kansagra just said about the study design and cortisol and how it's a natural occurring hormone and it exists, and that we're really not allowing ourselves to see the full picture in that study. Well, this was an amazing conversation. I loved the evidence that you provided. Maybe I will also be linking maybe some articles that you feel would be useful for people to read in our show notes.
Yes.
I'll get that from you, as well as your Instagram handle and TikTok. But what would be a final message for everyone listening today, a take home?
I would please encourage you to understand that as long as you are keeping your child safe and happy and thriving, there are a million right ways to do it. And when it comes to sleep, when it comes to feeding, when it comes to all the things that we equate with parenting, there are a million right ways to do it. And your child will still turn out 100% okay. Just love your child. Keep your child safe. It's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I love this. This was so great. Thanks for taking into consideration, obviously, all the research that but also just, again, the temperament of the children, the different siblings. I love that conversation, and adding all that nuance is so needed. And I hope people listen to this from both sides, the anti can't do anything regarding sleep training, whether it's cry or not. And then also people who are on the fence and people who are pro, I sleep trained and it was the best thing ever, so that we can really appreciate that nuance. Thanks again for joining. And where can everyone stay connected and learn more about your resources and all the amazing information?
My handle, anywhere social media is consumed, I'm there. That Sleep Doc, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. Yep, you can find me there.
Love it. Well, thank you again for joining me today, and I'm hopeful to have you on for a future episode too.
Sounds great. Ready whenever you are.
Thanks for tuning in. If you love this conversation, make sure to hit that thumbs up sign, share this episode on your social media channels, and subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all future episodes and our weekly educational videos. Have questions or comments? Make sure to comment below, and I'll see you all next time. Stay well, stay loved, and keep on shining.